Demonstrators demand liberty for the political prisoners and arrested protesters. After 9 days of unprecedented protests calling on President Alexander Lukashenko to resign, workers across the country joined a nationwide strike called by the opposition. Go away, chanted factory workers at the president who had come to shore up support. In an exchange with a worker, Lukashenko said new elections were possible, but only after the country holds a referendum.
A president should not make decisions as a result of pressure. A president must find a compromise. Exactly. That's how it will be. We need to approve a new constitution so the opposition won't be against it. It needs to be approved in a referendum because our previous constitution was approved in a referendum. And based on the new constitution, and if you want it, we will hold new elections for the parliament, presidency and local government bodies.
New and fair elections are what the opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, now in exile in Lithuania, campaigned for.
I'm prepared to take responsibility and act as the nation's leader during this period so the country settles down and gets back to normality, so that we can release all political prisoners and prepare a legal framework and conditions to hold another round of presidential elections in the shortest time possible.
As the internal pressure grows, so too does international concern. The EU is planning an emergency summit about Belarus on Wednesday. The bloc is already making a list of people who will face sanctions for the violence that followed the disputed elections. In Belarus, striking workers are joining determined protesters in calling for their leader to go.
And DW's Emily Sherwin is following developments. She joins us now. Emily, as we heard there, 9 nights of protest against Lukashenko. The pressure is high. What's at stake at the moment?
Well, I think in a way the political future of Alexander Lukashenko is at stake. And as you say, pressure on him has been growing and continues to grow. Yesterday, we saw protesters marching to several prisons in Minsk and demanding the release of political prisoners and of some of the people who were arrested during the protests. They gathered there, and more workers from state enterprises are joining protests and are joining strikes as well, including enterprises that really make up key sectors of the Belarusian economy. And yesterday, also one state TV channel joined those strikes. So these are really groups that were traditionally loyal to Lukashenko, and it seems that even support within those groups is crumbling. Yesterday, Lukashenko spoke to some workers at a factory, and even they were shouting at him to leave.
And Lukashenko, for his part, in reply to all of that, said on Monday that he would be ready to hold new elections and hand over power after a constitutional referendum. Do people believe him?
Well, the main demand of protesters still is for Lukashenko to leave. And of course, what he's been saying isn't very credible, considering the fact that yesterday alone, during the day, he said that there would only be new elections over his dead body. And then later on, he said that thing about there only being new elections after constitutional reforms. It's not really clear what exactly that would mean. But it does seem that the opposition is prepared for dialogue. One of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's close allies, Maria Kolesnikova, told DW that the opposition would even be open to dialogue with Lukashenko if necessary. And Tikhanovskaya, meanwhile, has gotten together kind of a board of people to coordinate the transfer of power. So it looks like the opposition is preparing for some sort of talks, and even Lukashenko may have some kind of a role in that.
And meantime, on the international level, Lukashenko is claiming that Russia says that it will support Belarus. The U.S. and the EU officials there are saying that Russia should stay out of it. So tell us a little bit more about that tension.
Well, the West wants Russia to stay out of it, and Russia clearly wants the West to stay out of it. They very much see Belarus as being kind of part of their sphere of influence. And on the weekend, we saw the Russian side even offering military support, if necessary, to Belarus. I think that was a very clear signal to the West to kind of stay out. Belarus is seen as a key ally here in Russia, and also as kind of a buffer zone between Russia and NATO allies. And I think even Russia now knows that Lukashenko has kind of lost legitimacy in the past few days, and that if he stayed, if they did prop him up, he would be a weak leader. So I'm sure that the Kremlin is looking around for other options. After all, even the opposition here, even the opposition in Belarus, rather, knows that Russia is a key partner, that Russia is an important country for the Belarusian economy, and that they will want to keep it that way. So it could be that if there are talks, at least that's what people in the media here are saying, that Russia could be some sort of a mediator in those talks. That could reflect the thinking in the Kremlin as well, that they want to mediate the future of Belarus.
DW's Emily Sherwin, thank you. And as the position of the veteran Belarus leader begins to look increasingly untenable, here in Germany, some past and present leaders say that they are seeing echoes of their own country's history playing out on the streets of Minsk.
On the left, East Germany 1989. On the right, Belarus 2020. In Germany, where memory of peaceful revolution is only 3 decades old, comparisons are being drawn between the protests in Belarus and those in the GDR, which eventually led to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
A deciding factor will be what Russian President Vladimir Putin does, whether he supports Alexander Lukashenko and the regime, or whether he has the wisdom and intelligence of the former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and says, that's no good, we have to give up this country, enable democracy, and enable a new partnership between Russia and Belarus.
Some German papers are already calling the Belarus protests the beginning of the end of the dictatorship. But what that end might look like is the question occupying the minds of political leaders in Berlin.
I appeal to President Lukashenko to seek dialogue, not to use violence, but to use dialogue instead. And I appeal to the Belarusian military not to use violence against its own people. The people of this stricken but proud country deserve our solidarity and support.
Germany has repeatedly criticized Lukashenko's allegedly rigged election win, as well as the violence used against protesters. But politically it remains cautious, with all eyes in Europe anxiously observing Moscow. In the meantime, solidarity in terms of sanctions will be the focus of the EU's emergency summit on Wednesday.
The EU has to make it very, very clear, especially the German EU Council presidency, that Lukashenko is not the elected president of Belarus. These elections were massively manipulated. And at the same time, make it very clear that the sanctions will directly affect Lukashenko.
We are the people was a key slogan of the demonstrators in the GDR calling for democracy. Now, more than 30 years later, Belarusian protesters are demanding that they get to determine the future direction of their country.
Well, for more tonight, I want to bring in Miriam Kozmel. She's a senior expert on Eastern Europe at Germany's Bertelsmann Foundation. Miriam, it's good to have you on the day. Based on what we have seen in the last week, would you say that Alexander Lukashenko's days as president of Belarus are now numbered?
Yes, definitely. Lukashenko's days as president of Belarus are now numbered. I would have been more hesitant a week ago, but the pressure from what used to be his clientele, the state factory workers mentioned in your report, and from this decentralized demonstrations and strikes all over the country, even unlikely institutions like state TV, is clear.
What about the Russian factor here? We know that Russia has intervened in other republics before, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014. It's impossible to rule out a Russian military intervention, but would you agree that the chances of Vladimir Putin sending in his troops to prop up Lukashenko are anemic at best?
Well, it would, in my view, be not advantageous if President Putin sent in troops, because that would completely destroy the otherwise good relations Belarusians have, or the good feelings they have towards Russians overwhelmingly. However, the situation is not very pleasant for Putin as well. He has demonstrations in Khabarovsk to handle in Russia. And he is not interested in Belarus developing as a more democratic country, because that undermines his argument that a Slavic nation needs an autocracy to be a successful state. So I wouldn't exclude it. I do not think it will be an open intervention, or it would be. But the threats have been there, also by Lukashenko, who has mentioned the Collective Security Treaty Organization that Belarus and Russia are a part of. And he has mentioned a troops amassment at the western borders of Belarus, which of course is not taking place, but they are keeping that option open.
We know that the European Union plans to hold an emergency summit on Wednesday to discuss Belarus. What role does Europe have here? I mean, is this an opportunity to pull Belarus closer to Europe?
I wouldn't speak about pulling Belarus closer to Europe, because the Belarusians do not want to be a geopolitical factor. They just want a better life with their civic rights being taken seriously, and an end to human rights violations. However, I would expect that the European Union makes it very clear vis-à-vis Russia that any intervention would be met with economic sanctions that do hurt, because at present the situation still is very dangerous, and here the European Union should be very clear.
We know that the presidents of Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, and Estonia have sent a letter to Belarus offering cooperation if 3 demands are met. They want to see an end of the use of force against protesters. They want detained protesters to be released. And they want to see Belarus organize a national reconciliation roundtable. What leverage do these countries have right now with Lukashenko?
Well, particularly Lithuania has long-standing relations, and they have managed a dual policy of, on the one hand, supporting activists. Mrs. Tikhanovskaya is currently in Lithuania, but also having economic relationships that simply give them knowledge and contacts. However, you are right, as singular countries, their power is limited. However, they could team up with the OSCE. Currently, we have the Albanian chair. We will have Sweden next year, as of next year. And I think together with the OSCE, they could support such a national reconciliation roundtable that has actually been already started to be organized by the Belarusian opposition.
And we also got reports today that all of the protesters who have been arrested in the last week and detained, that they have been released. So do you see that then as proof that the pressure coming from its neighbors is working in Belarus?
Yes and no. You are right. This is a huge success. However, there is information that between 70 and 100 people have gone missing. And this is another thing that the EU could demand at the summit, to immediately learn about the whereabouts of these people.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Those people remain missing tonight. Miriam Korsmel, senior expert on Eastern Europe at Germany's Bertelsmann Foundation. Miriam, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
You're very welcome.